Hi, hello everyone. This is Dr. Sandeep Gupta here from the Lotus Institute of Holistic Health and Lotus Holistic Medicine. I am very excited to have with me today Robert Augustus Masters, PhD. Dr. Masters is a pioneering integral psychotherapist and group leader, relationship expert, and psychospiritual guide and trainer with a doctorate in psychology. He's also the author of many books, including Transformation Through Intimacy, Spiritual Bypassing, Emotional Intimacy, To Be a Man, one of my personal favorites, and Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark, his most recent book, and also the audio program, Knowing Your Shadow, which is really beneficial audio series. His intuitive, uniquely integral work, developed over the past 4 decades, blends the psychological and physical with the emotional and spiritual, emphasizing full-blooded embodiment and awakening, emotional authenticity and literacy, deep shadow work, and the development of relational maturity. At essence, his work is about becoming more intimate with all that we are, high and low, dark and light, dying and undying, in the service of the deepest possible healing, awakening, and integration. He lives in Ashland, Oregon with his wife, Diane, and I was privileged enough to visit there in September 2018 and be part of one of his men's groups. So to start off, Robert, could you please tell us how you came to be an integral psychotherapist and how you came to develop such a unique and intuitive approach to personal emotional healing?
Well, I didn't plan it. I was in some severe relational pain when I was in my 20s, never done therapy before, didn't care about it, etc. It's just on a purely spiritual path. But my pain was so great, I found my way to some quality psychotherapy, started doing group work, and I fell in love with it right off the bat. And I was a natural at it. And I developed my own way of working over the last 40 years. It was always intuitive, it always involved the body, lots of body work, emotional work, and has evolved and evolved and is still evolving. But there's 2 things in my blood creatively. There's my writing, which I've done since I was a kid, and there's my work with others, which I started back in my 20s, and I'm still very much into it now as I hit my 73rd year.
Wow. So in a sense, it sounds like you came to this with a really practical focus. It was all about your life and the learning you had to do. It wasn't theoretical. And I think that really shines.
I worked for free. I loved it so much. I did it for free for a couple of years. I didn't even think of hanging out my shingle until 78. So I love the work. I mean, it's a passion for me. It's creative. It keeps me vital. And I'll probably do it as long as I live. I don't have no sense of retirement whatsoever.
Wow, that's great. And when I was in the men's group with you in 2018, one of the things that really stood out was that you weren't reading from a theory book or a textbook. You were right there in the moment. And anything that seemed to come up for the men that were there in the group, you were able to respond to. And that was a really interesting part of your approach.
Yes, a completely unstructured approach. It means, right, if someone speaks, does something, I respond intuitively. And it works and it works and it works even more deeply because I'm not bringing a preset knowledge or structure to it. I'm being spontaneously, compassionately present in that moment, whether it's working with deep fear, trauma, relational hassles. And this, when I train therapists, people want to be therapists, it's the same thing. I'm teaching them how to trust their intuition, how to let what needs to happen flow out of their compassionate connection with the person they're working with.
Great. Yeah, I was very appreciative of that approach, and it really helped everyone in the group there unravel really their personal history and what they were working with at the time. And so really talking a little bit about this moment in history, we're really finding ourselves in the middle of a major viral pandemic, the likes of which we haven't experienced perhaps for 100 years. And what would you say the sort of emotions are that you are seeing showing up for people, and what opportunities is this world situation posing for people in terms of their personal emotional healing?
Well, it's a good question. It's everything's coming up for a lot of people, and at the core of it is fear. Whether we acknowledge it or not, the fear can get into our minds to such an extent we get paranoid. We start to over focus on conspiracy theories about all of this, or we're just insecure in our job. Relationships become more strained, perhaps, and there's just everyday anxiety, deeper anxiety, there's a lot of fear.
Mhm.
And I think at the core of it is fear of death, which is usually unconscious anxiety in many people, but it's sitting there. We're being rocked, and there's an opportunity here, a tremendous opportunity to grow, but it requires that we actually work with our fear in a way that is effective. That means where the fear doesn't control us and we don't get rid of it. You can't get rid of fear, but you can change your relationship to it. So if I'm afraid and I work with it skillfully, I'm not being controlled by the fear. I'm just aware right now, here's fear, or it could be grief or anger or sadness, numbness. I'm working with that state. And we'll, later on, I'll do a guided meditation about all of this. It's an effective way of getting into it. But we have to realize our fear is not the problem, even though it's a bit of a pandemic itself right now. It's what are we going to do with this fear besides try and run away from it, distract ourselves from it. And the hard work here at Sandeep is that we need to turn toward our fearfulness. Not all at once. We move too quickly toward what's painful, challenging, scary. We tend to rebound back even further. But if we approach it skillfully and become more intimate with that thing, that quality, that process called fear, we become capable of working with it. It may transmute into anger, passion, excitement, or it may stay as it is, but we are no longer at its mercy. But here's the other part I need to emphasize. We cannot think our way out of our fear. For many of us, our fear is pre-rational. It's immune to the most brilliant insights, rational considerations of it. It's in our guts, it's primal. And it has to do with survival, life and death. And even if that's not truly the case, it can often feel like it's a life and death situation. And the key to working with fear, in a nutshell, I'll get into this more later, is to get inside it, which sounds counterintuitive. It means you approach it, you start to explore its characteristics, its nooks and crannies, you become more familiar with it. So it's not just this thing called fear, it's this complex, evolving, shifting process that involves our body and mind quite grippingly, but not to such an extent we can't work with it.
Right. Yeah. So some of these ways that you frame working with fear and other emotions are quite counterintuitive in a sense. And I think many of us have come from family backgrounds where being fearful was shunned, or we were encouraged to suppress our fear. While you're saying we need to actually turn towards it, that can be pretty scary for some people to start
It
with.
is scary, so that's why you want to do it carefully. And in that context, it's important sometimes to personify our fearfulness as a very young child who's scared, really scared, who happens to be us at that age, at an early age. And once we do that, once we turn toward that part of ourselves we can call the child, the very young child, perhaps even the infant, something starts to shift. We become aware of our fear more. We're not quite so enmeshed with it. We don't get so far away from it we lose touch with it, but we move a little distance away from it through naming it and taking good care of that place in us that's scared, vulnerable, innocent, childlike. Doing two things with that child. One is to love that child, to move towards more a loving relationship with it. And two is to become more openly protective of that child. Because when we grew up and we were little, if we didn't have protection from difficult situations or abuse, etc., it was hard on us and it left a scar, did a lot of damage. So it's really important to be protective of that child, whether it's from outside forces or internal forces we all have, like the bullying of our inner critic, for example, to protect our child from that. And we can't do any of this if we're turned away from our fear. So it is a counterintuitive step to turn toward the uncomfortable, the difficult, the painful, turn toward fear a little bit at a time. It's like you're approaching the dragon's cave and the treasure's in there, you want it, there's that dragon. You approach it skillfully, slowly, one conscious step at a time. So if I'm afraid or you're afraid or someone hearing this is afraid, it's important not to shame ourselves for having the fear. We all have fear. Is to get a little closer to it so you can actually see it. You may see it from a distance, you may need binoculars for a while, but after a while, you're in the dragon's cave, so to speak. Here's fear. What's this texture like? Does it have a color? How old were you when you first felt this kind of fear? How do you generally work with fear? What's your history with it? And it's not about being a superhero and just plunging in. It's more like step by step, just everyday courage. Courage means we're afraid, but we do what we need to do anyways. And facing our fear like this takes courage. It also develops courage. And I've written about this extensively in my last few books about fear, how to work with it. And we need to become more students of fear instead of avoiders of it.
Right, true. Yeah, and I think sometimes in the West, the tendency is that we like to think of ourselves as being mature adults, and we like to think that, you know, that we've transcended all of these kind of, you know, these more childlike
Such a comforting
emotions.
illusion, right? That's so
Right.
comforting. And it's actually it's beautifully humbling when we cut through that and go, you know what, you could be really old, done a lot of work in yourself, stuff still arises, we still can get reactive with a partner. We're not trying to be a saint, we're just trying to wake up more, become more responsible, but we're not hammering a perfectionist agenda onto ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And when you let go of having a perfectionist agenda about being perfect and being free of any kind of negative emotions, as we often frame them as, there's sort of a liberation in that, isn't it? In just being able to be vulnerable to
And what
whatever
a
is
relief
really
to
there.
just be a human being again, instead of trying to be this spiritual giant or ascending or transcending all of this. This is not here to be transcended, it's here to become intimate with.
Right.
When you're intimate with something, you're not trying to get away from it. You just simply are aware of it. You're not lost in it. You're close to it, but you're not enmeshed or lost with it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think this is really, really useful stuff. And for me, when I started doing a little bit of work around the inner child, it seemed to free up a lot of energy in a sense to just be able to connect with something that was really going on. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Just like, for example, we all have an inner critic, and many people, perhaps most people, are being run by their inner critic. That means the internalized toxic shame we all carry,
right.
internalized sense of shaming ourselves. The sentences will remain the same usually. You're not good enough. You're not right. Maybe you should have been born. There's many levels to it, but it's basically an internal bully. And it's just shame uh, playing a parental role, badly, of course. And most of us will listen unquestioningly to our inner critic's pronouncements about us, just like a child listens to their parent when they're very little. We don't question it. And the point is not to get rid of it, again, an impossibility, but to relocate it to the periphery of our being, not to let it run us. That's another way of reducing fear. Get more intimate with your inner critic. Don't let it run the show. Don't get busy believing its messages about you. Question it. Drop deeper. Then you
Right.
grow up more.
Right. Yeah, this is really interesting, this piece around the inner critic. And I think for me, before I started getting into this work, I don't know that I even realized that I had an inner critic. But as
Mhm.
I got into it and I was able to tap in, I realized there was a really sort of a toxic voice there that was always pushing back against me.
Yeah,
And it
on
really
your
can have
back.
a negative effect, can't it, if you're not developing a healthy relationship with it.
Well, if you don't, then you cannot work with your inner child very effectively, because the inner critic's going to sabotage whatever good you've done with that child. So it's a bit like having your own child that's young and there's something unpleasant happening to that child. Some things are being said that are very crippling, and you step in, you get in between the child and you and the inner critic in yourself, and you do not allow that inner critic access to the child. That's really important. It's not just we're working with fear here in the face of this pandemic. It's also working with related emotions like shame,
Mm.
anger. Sometimes the defense we have against fear is just to get really pissed off, which can be good, but it also can have negative consequences if we don't handle the anger correctly. It's not about anger is better than fear, but if you're working with fear, you're probably going to find yourself also needing to work with anger and with shame.
Right. And what I'm picking up right now is I think a lot of people have lost employment, or for instance have had to scale down their employment because of the
Mm.
lockdowns that are happening. For a man particularly, that can bring up a lot of shame that, I'm not able to be successful in my
Oh,
work life
yeah.
at the moment. And some people are turning towards alcohol a lot more. What are some of the ways that men particularly can work with the situation where they've lost their identity around
Well,
it?
they need to learn about shame more. Many of us aren't very aware of shame. It's like a hidden continent in ourselves. We don't understand how much it's run the show, partially because when we feel shame, it's such an uncomfortable emotion, we tend to flee it through dissociation, getting numb, withdrawing emotionally, or through aggression, attacking others. Some people, when they're criticized at all, they feel some shame, their immediate response is to attack the other, put them down. And there's a way through this, which is to become aware of shame and not get away from it when it kicks in. Turn toward it a little bit, sit in the fire. When I do men's groups, I often have the men express and share things that are very painful, often full of shame. I have them sit maybe facing the other men and tell the truth, yes, be vulnerable, but sit in the shame with some dignity. Don't grovel as trying to get away from the shame. Stay with it. It's unpleasant, but it will burn through you quickly if you sit in it. It doesn't get worse. And then we can make amends if we've done harm, or if it's toxic shame we're dealing with, we start to wake up to that and cut through it. But to do that, we have to become a student of shame, understand it, see how it runs us, see how it runs every level of government. It's in everyone. And if it's not worked with, it runs the show. It may be hidden in your shadow, but it's still there, with this agenda still dominating you.
Right. So in a sense, what you're saying is if you haven't developed a close relationship with your shame and come to understand it, then it's always going to be an unconscious driving factor there in the background.
Yeah.
So we're bringing it out into the light rather than keeping it in the
For
dark.
example, say if your partner, someone close to you criticizes you and you get super defensive, often what's underneath that is the shame that person's statements or energy is induced in you. And then maybe they were right, maybe they were even being compassionate, but you feel shame because it so quickly shifts into aggression. You don't even know it. You don't realize your defensiveness is actually a way of avoiding the vulnerability that you were experiencing when that person first gave you some degree of criticism. So it all requires, the other thing to factor in here is not just turning toward the unpleasant, it's also deepening your awakening. You become a little more spiritual, you develop the ability to be more mindful, then you can catch this quicker. So if you're being reactive with a partner, which is super, super common, you can name it more quickly. You can say in the midst of the reactivity, when you're not being so good to the other person, oh, reactivity. I'm being reactive. Oh my God. And if you just say that and shut up, stop, some magic can happen. Most of us will tend to keep going. Well, why shouldn't I be reactive? Look what you said to me or did. But we have the capacity then at least to wake up to it. Like where we can name it. Here's reactivity. Here's shame. Here's fear. It sounds so simple, but once we name it, we create a subtle distance from it so we can now start to relate to it, not from it.
Right. So for instance, if people are at the moment finding, for instance, they're a little bit more irritable, a little bit more snappy, particularly if they're spending more time with their partner than normal, if they're able to just practice this one little thing of naming and noticing when they're becoming reactive, would you say that's quite transformative?
That's a major step, because it sounds easy when we're saying it now, but when you're in the midst of a reactive bout and you're sure you're right and the other person is just a piece of whatever, you're being reactive, and it takes. See, if I admit that, or you admit it, and we're in the midst of something like that, it's immediately humbling. It gets us off our high horse and we stop being so fanatically obsessed with being right. We go for something deeper. We go for connection, communion, and we get vulnerable. And the irritability you mentioned, I think that's very natural in these times, especially if you're not that close to a partner or your kids are just really young and just don't quite get it and are acting up. The more you work with this skillfully, the better. For example, your child's really driving you crazy, and instead of unloading on them, you go in an adjoining room, have a conscious rant. Maybe you got a pillow over your mouth so they can't hear you, but you just cut loose emotionally for a minute or two, and I've written about this, and you just let all the excessive overwhelm, emotional overload discharge from you. You don't come out of the room necessarily completely calm and clear, but you're now in a position where if you're still angry, the anger is clean. It's not aggressive. It's not punishing. It's got some heart in it. And you still can be angry, still be firm, but it's not overloaded. Because when it's overloaded, the other person picks up that excessive energy, the harshness in it, perhaps. And if they're a kid, they're probably going to feel some shame, maybe some fear, hearing you like that. And these are times where we can practice this even more. We have more time, many of us, and there's also a greater opportunity to really see our reactivity because it's going to be in our face more. We can't distract ourselves in the usual way.
Right, right.
Can't watch sports all day, whatever. We're in it. And to me, it's like a long meditation retreat, which can really be irritating to people, discomforting, boring. We have a chance now to not get away from it. We can sit with it, get to know it bit by bit by bit.
Right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right there. I think for a lot of people, the distractions have been taken away, and they're coming more face to face with all the material. And so, as you say, going and having a conscious rant is actually very healthy. It's
And it's
something.
effective. It takes 1 or 2 minutes if you do it full out to where you're not self-conscious and you say whatever you want. There's no spiritual correctness at the helm. You're just going nuts, but responsibly, not breaking furniture or scaring your children or your partner.
Mhm.
When you emerge from that, and I've seen it happen 1,000 times with people, you will feel more settled, more grounded. And if you're upset, the upset won't be running you. You'll just be
Mhm.
aware of it. And
Great.
if
And
you're insecure from this whole thing too, I think it's important to bring this up as well. There's a lot of insecurity for people, understandably so, given what's happening.
mm,
But again, the insecurity can be treated the same way you might treat your fear. Conceptualize it as a young you, and your heart goes out to that person who's scared or feels really insecure. And it doesn't take away the insecurity, but it changes how you view it. Then you start to sense the bigger picture in which life is insecure. Death can come at any time. It's not like other people go. We can go. 250,000 of us go every day, die every day. There's a sense of settling into that deeper sense of yourself. And there's a calming implicit in that and inherent in that. When you tune into who you are beyond your personality and conditioning, you feel yourself at the core of your being. You may not be calm, but you're able to hold it all. Like the miracle is our heart has the ability to hold all of it, good and bad, everything. Not to excuse the shit, the abuse, the harm, but to hold it so you can see it more clearly.
right. And so I think some people may be, scared or worried that if they start inviting or getting, getting intimate with some of these emotions, perhaps they're more likely to be abusive or to act out. Do you
If they
find that is
overdo
the
it,
case?
it's possible if you overdo it. If you go into your anger, you think this means what I'm talking about means permission to be fully raging, you're missing the point. It's about every degree of freedom requires a corresponding degree of responsibility. Freedom and responsibility go together. And as you learn to express yourself more openly emotionally, you have to also take into account the impact you're having on others. And anger is a key one. I mean, I've written about this a lot, but I'll say it in short now. I distinguish anger from aggression. If I'm angry at you, really pissed off at you, and I get aggressive, I'm fiery, loud, etc., fierce, but I don't give a crap about you. I'm just there to take you down, and you feel it. That's aggression. Healthy anger, I may be just as loud and fiery, but I still remember I care about you, and my heart's involved a little bit. It's not just coming from my guts, my adrenaline. My heart's also involved, so I'm not dangerous in the way I was when I was being aggressive. There's a safety in it. I've seen this so many times when someone delivers their anger with some degree of heart, the other person is less likely to pull back, get defensive, want to leave the room. And we can all learn this. It's emotional literacy 101. Healthy anger. Here's healthy shame. Here's how to work with fear. We can learn this, even though it wasn't part of our educational system for almost all of us growing up. And I've seen men who thought they were emotionally illiterate learn emotional literacy and be a full partner to the women they're with.
Mhm.
It's not just a woman's domain. It's all of our responsibility to step into our emotions with a capacity to deepen our intimacy with them, know them better. And once you start to do that, it's delightful in a way because you get to see the emotions more clearly. It's not just fear or anger or shame. You see the subtleties and you see the degrees of it. Here's irritation, here's rage, or in fear, here's worry, dread, terror, anxiety. I mean, there's so many types of each emotion. They all bleed into each other. It's a very complex phenomenon that involves body, mind, social factors, conditioning. I have a whole book on this actually on emotion called Emotional Intimacy.
Mhm. Right. And so for someone who's finding that they're getting anger coming up, a lot more than previously, would you
Mm.
say, similarly to how you mentioned about just being able to name reactivity, would you say being able to name the fact that they're angry in that
Yes.
moment is helpful?
Sometimes people, especially men, can be angry and not even name it as such. They may think, "Oh, I'm calm, I'm fine," and their adrenaline's on the rise, their pulse rate's up high, they're showing all the signs of anger, and their tone has a certain edge to it. If they're a nice guy, and they don't even know they're angry. And I think a lot of us, when we are angry, we know it, we don't feel safe expressing it because we have an association between anger and danger from a difficult childhood, perhaps. We saw anger expressed sloppily and it scared us. It meant for us a lack of love. So if we associate anger with a lack of love or danger, we're going to want to stay away from it. Or if we're on a spiritual path that says anger is a bad thing, it's an unwholesome emotion, it's a hindrance to spiritual awakening, that can reinforce all this. Where in fact, anger is a natural emotion and it needs to be brought out of the bad news box and not pathologized and treated like a resource, which it is when it's skillfully handled. It helps us maintain boundaries, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is probably quite new for a lot of people that they can actually work with anger in a healthy way. They can learn to name it. They can keep some heart for the person that they're
Yes.
angry at during the process. And through that, they can keep a level of connection. It's not mutating into aggression or more toxic forms of anger.
Yes, exactly. It's also important in our conversation to bring in the notion of collective fear,
Yeah.
because collective fear is real and it's all around us. In the news, it basically shows up as the message, we are threatened. Even if that's blunted by the entertainment pages, sports pages, the news is still basically saying we're threatened. And especially since the advent of nuclear war, that became a possibility. And I think after a while, we tended to numb ourselves to that or numb ourselves to the ecological crisis our world is in. But collective fear is real. So the way you work with it is like with everyday fear, you turn toward it, you get to name it. Notice how you feel after maybe you read some news, conflicting opinions on COVID, et cetera. Notice if there's a little more fear, fear levels are increasing. Tune into it. And here's the thing with collective fear I've seen, which is like a big miracle. When people turn toward their collective fear and they feel it, which means letting yourself feel the fear of other people as well as your own, including those who are more scared than you are. What I've seen happen when people do that is they start to bring the other people's fear into their heart. It's an organic process. You start to feel compassion for the people who are suffering more than you are, or I am, who have a deeper level of fear, more insecurity, and you feel for them. It's compassion, it's empathy centered. That starts to break the heart open. So here's the miracle where collective fear can lead to a sense of collective grief. You feel grief for everyone. I don't care how tiny it is, you feel the grief and your heart starts to crack open more. Your heart gets broken open and you have a sense, not intellectually only, but viscerally in your whole being, we're in this together. Not because some wise person says it, you feel it in your bones. We're in it together. Everyone's hurting and there's a lot of danger in the world. There's a lot of ugly shit going on and there's a lot of fear. And here you are feeling the other person's essence. You're sensing it. And that collective grief brings us together. Like if you can grieve with another person who's been estranged from you and you both grieve, which I know doesn't happen often, but when it does, there's a healing. Without that grief, we end up being too tribalistic. My country versus yours, Republicans versus Democrats, conspiracy theorists versus the people on the other extreme. It goes on and on and on. And to get to that grief is a big thing. And I think collective fear is one of the things that can really push us in that direction.
Right. So being able to let in the collective fear and
Yes,
in metabolizing it in a sense to a certain
exactly.
degree.
You may think hearing this means, oh my God, I'll get more afraid. But what it actually does, it actually opens your capacity for love more. Not in a new age fashion, but in a very grounded way. You start to feel it. And it's very sobering. It's very sobering to do that. And we're at that edge. There's a lot, everyone has grief, and not many people have touched their deep grief. It's like this frozenness in us. And we have to bring not just an axe to it, but permission to crack that iciness, that armoring, so we can get to our heart. And without that, it's very difficult to turn the corner. We are all, I think, being invited to turn as human beings, put our collective shoulder to the wheel, make a difference, a real difference.
Right. Yeah, I think what you're describing sounds like it's a real healing balm for what I'm seeing going on social media a lot, which is that
Yes.
there's a lot of reactivity going on. So people are reacting to people who are presenting any type of alternative narrative about the situation. There's a lot of name calling going on, and I guess there is a sense of not having integrated the collective fear and grief there that's leading to that extreme reactivity.
Yes. Well, that makes it worse, doesn't it? I mean, the conspiracy theories to the extreme have here's their position. Other people can be just being too cautious, overdoing it. I mean, and it's not like you have to pick one or the other. What you want to do is pick something that is not married to either position of the extremes. You're aware of the point of view of those on either end of this polarity we're describing. You don't have to take on their view, but you also don't want to dehumanize them. So those are idiots. How can they believe that? Or that person, come on, I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to let fear run me. I'm going to get out there and hug everyone. There's so much here. And again, we see how easily humans divide themselves. My camp versus your camp, my tribe versus yours. It's not about getting agreement. You could be with someone you're close to and have a profound disagreement on something and make empathy with the other more important than whose point of view wins. And when I see people connect that way, especially in couples work, they may still disagree on the surface, but because they're connected at the heart and the belly, it doesn't matter as much. It doesn't matter as much if I like chocolate and she likes vanilla. Who cares after a while? I mean, so what? If our hearts are connected, that makes a huge difference.
Right, and you could say that in amongst the conspiracy theory type approach, there are some genuine concerns that people have there about political agendas being pushed forward and
Yes.
so on, and so there can be a healthy level of concern and healthy paranoia perhaps.
Well, if it gets into paranoia, is a tricky emotion, because paranoia is what happens when fear gets confined to the mind and doesn't get out in physical outlets. If it reaches a certain point, it turns into anxiety, worry. Step further, you can get paranoia. In extreme paranoia, the person doesn't even know they're paranoid. They believe it. If they say something bizarre is happening in the room, which cannot possibly be happening, you don't believe it, and they don't want anything to do with you. They can be an extreme. But again, paranoia can be worked with by treating it like any other fear. Name it, see it, drop down into your body, feel the child. And here's the other thing. It can be a slip up in either extreme we just described. Fundamentalism. Right. If I'm fundamentalist, I only have one perspective. My perspective is the one. If you don't have it, something's wrong with you, Sandeep. Like that. When we wake up more, we become capable of holding multiple perspectives. We don't believe them all necessarily, but we can hold them.
Right. Yeah. So in a sense, there is more than one truth, or you could say that truth has many layers to it in many different situations. And I guess that's one thing I'm finding in this current situation. There is a certain truth in just looking at the mainstream, approach of just having to lock down for a certain period of time. And there's also another level of truth there, and perhaps above that there's another level of truth. And as you're saying, being able to not be so fanatical about one point of view is part.
And also not to confuse truth with opinion. Many people will say this is my truth, and it's really just their opinion or perception.
Right.
Truth is a big thing, and I think we can't really touch the truth deeply unless we're in a very centered place, we're in touch with our being. And when you go to that level, then what appears to your mind as paradox appears to your heart as truth. There's levels to it. You sense the paradoxical nature of reality. You drop down deeper. And this pandemic is an opportunity to drop down to something deeper than our surface reactions, our usual sense of self. It can even reset your sense of identity. Not that it should or has to, but it can do that. It can be an awakening, or it can be a hell ride. And implicit in that, to me, is the capacity to deepen our intimacy with all that we are. That's shadow work to me at the core. Becoming intimate with everything we are, including the stuff that is really not very flattering at all. At all. Because in our shadows is all sorts of dark stuff. There's also our bigness and our beauty. All the things we've pushed away out of sight, so to speak, to survive. And this is also an opportunity these days to bring our shadow out of the dark, to get to know it, to get to know what's in it, what's running us, what's pulling our strings. Don't we want to know? And to know that, we have to turn toward our fear. We just have to. Otherwise, we remain on the outside of ourselves.
Right, and let's talk a little bit more about this concept of shadow. I understand that shadow was first coined as a term by Carl Jung.
Yes.
Many people understand that it relates to our darker side, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it?
It's whatever you had to push away to survive. And my deepest sense of shadow is that it contains our unfaced and unilluminated conditioning, which means it's not just this arcane thing full of archetypes we have to study and get Jungian about. It's much deeper. It's about our conditioning, which we all have, that we have not yet faced, haven't illuminated. So deep shadow work is a profound thing. It involves working with trauma. It involves working with what we truly are. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, everything's in our shadow is not just dark, heavy. There's brightness there, there's light, there's beauty. And if you had to push something aside to survive your childhood, it went into your shadow. And by shadow, I mean our internal storehouse for what we deny about ourselves, don't like about ourselves. And without working on shadow, I think we're doomed because we don't know ourselves. And unfortunately, leadership throughout the world is largely characterized by a lack of knowledge of shadow. You don't know yourself, then you're run by your shadow, whatever side you tend to be on. If you know your shadow well, you have more options with everything, emotions, practices. And one of the key things in our shadow often is our fear of death, of annihilation, of ending. And that too requires it to be brought out. Like in the United States, my country, we're death phobic. Not everyone, but a lot of the country is death phobic. We dress up corpses like they're going to a party, like they didn't really die. We don't like to use the word die, we say passed on, transition. Right. We're avoiding the basic bare reality that we die. And once one faces that, not just intellectually, but with our whole being, we don't get more morbid. We actually become more alive. I mean, I would put it this way, avoiding death deadens us. We over-fortify ourselves, even though we know we cannot outfox it, outlive it. And once we face that, life is more precious.
It's very true, isn't it? That once you've fully embraced mortality, the beauty of each moment really starts to shine through.
It does. You have to truly embrace it.
Right. And would you say sort of this Western epidemic of, ambition and materialism and some of these kind of tendencies, are they related to the deep fear around death and mortality?
I think death is at the core of a lot of it. It's more complex than just simply death, but that fear, if it's not faced and it's driven into our unconscious more and more, it can make other fears that are apparently lesser fears bigger. And the good news is, again, facing our mortality actually deepens our life. In a sense, we die into a deeper life then. We enter something deeper. And I have practices, I do that every day around this. Not that I'm going to die tomorrow necessarily, but I've come very close to death a number of times. And actually, I like it. It may sound crazy, but I enjoy those meditations where I go in deeper. It's like going to a deep sleep, but staying conscious. Letting go of the body, letting go of the mind, letting go of our sense of self. And then that doesn't mean you space out and ignore everyday practicalities. It means you bring a deeper presence to everything you do, everything.
Right. And one thing that seems to be happening during this pandemic is that people are moving towards a simpler approach to life, because we don't have all of these, you could say, all of these different facets of our life that we used to, like going out to bars and clubs and restaurants. We're spending more time at home.
Well, it's like we're
And
being forced to be in a long meditation retreat. And many of us don't want to be in a meditation retreat, but we're forced to be in that, and we're basically being left alone with our minds. Distractions are less. There's still plenty, but it's not the same as before. And there's the miracle. People in Los Angeles, for example, can go outside and look. You can actually see the mountains.
Mhm.
It's clear, etc. We're slowing down, and something's happening. It's like maybe not a reset yet, but to me, I hear from a lot of people actually are starting to really enjoy just being quiet by themselves. Don't want to watch TV all day, dropping in deeper, maybe writing more than they have, just taking care to know themselves better,
Mm.
including their fear.
Yeah, so it really is a great, opportunity for personal growth if you decide to take it that way. Another direction I wanted to take this in is that those with chronic medical conditions, and I think you've been quite open in sharing some of your brushes with chronic health challenges, there seems to be the potential for instance, the fear and grief around the pandemic to have a negative effect. And also the other thing I'm seeing is there can be a distraction from all of the focus on the media on COVID-19 to
Yeah.
distract from one's chronic health needs. Can you talk a little bit about that and how
Well, I
you
don't
think
think this should make people feel any less focused on their chronic health, whatever's going on for them, that was going on prior to this whole pandemic. It's the same principle applies. Work with your fear so that when you're faced with, say, some stage 4 stuff, some really heavy stuff, you can become more adept at handling the fear that's present in that. And then if I would advise people like that, be as skimpy as you can when you're checking out the news each day. Like, there's not much you need to know. It's the same stuff. You can check out various opinions, but when you do that, if you notice yourself contracting, sinking down, drop it, go meditate, do some yoga, clean up your house, do something that takes you away from that. Because I see many people over focus on the news. And the news, of course, there's the theme, we are threatened. And you've got all kinds of experts debating each other. So where's the truth? You can't rely on experts outside you for the truth. You're going to have to discern for yourself. When you hear all this, what rings true for me? Not based on my opinions or my conditioning, but in my heart of hearts, what is true?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? To that getting away from all of this different chatter from the media and YouTube and Facebook and so many other internet platforms. I've been finding myself that in the evenings I've been getting drawn into looking at YouTube videos and various other movies or clips that people have been sending me and so on. And probably, it's been affecting my sleep to some degree. So these things can have a very direct effect on you
Oh yeah,
physiologically as
you
well,
can look
can't
at
they?
your dreams. Many people's dreams will have shifted.
Mm.
And again, here's an opportunity to work with dreams. We have an expression in Western culture, just to dream. But for my work, I hold dreams in very high esteem. Like, there's so much in a dream to be unpacked, looked at, explored, not just analytically, but in every level. And people could be having dreams that are catastrophic to do with pandemic.
Right.
It's there.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping, I think this is an opportunity too to sleep better. I mean, a lot of people I know don't get enough sleep. Busy, work, got some energy. I'm sleeping more than ever during this time, and I'm enjoying it. I have a nap every day. Yeah, I'm 70, I'll be 73 this year, but I work hard, I'm vital, and I love laying down for that nap. I used to not allow myself that. I think I don't need that. I got high energy, I got important things to do. Who has time for a nap? Now I do, and I will continue it when this is over.
Yeah, it's an important point. And I've been finding there is a level of just, energetic and mental exhaustion that just goes along with everything that's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
It's an exhausting time. And so maybe taking a little more time to rest and just digest everything that's happening is very
And
healthy.
keep working out too. I mean, if you can, going for walks,
Mhm.
doing workouts. If you don't have weights, you can use your body as the weight. There's a lot of things we can do to keep ourselves physically alive and healthy, and not be bewailing the fact my gym is closed. I can't go to the gym. I mean, there's so much you can do.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's many different exercise routines people can find on the internet, and they're simple. It's going back to doing things like push-ups and sit-ups
Yeah.
and
Or holding a very long plank, how to do that.
right, right. So you can keep all of that going, and really just taking more and more time to, as you say, to just feel everything that's going on within you. And would you say that journaling can be a helpful
I think it's
tool?
wonderful. I'd say it's a wonderful thing, just especially if you make yourself do it every day. Start off and just write whatever's there. And if you don't feel like writing, write about that. If you're bored, write about that.
Right.
Whatever's there, write. If you give yourself half an hour, ideally, maybe a little more, and do it. This is a lovely time to write. I'm writing more than I have in the last couple of years. I love when I have time in the day, sit down, write, let it pour out. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I did this process called The Artist's Way, which I'm sure you're familiar with, on
Yes.
Julia Cameron, where she really talked about doing what she called the morning pages first thing in the morning, and writing 3 pages of
Yes.
stream of consciousness thoughts. And I found that was really quite amazing how powerful that was in terms of connecting one to one's creativity and to the subconscious, if you like.
Yeah. I was just thinking, Sandy, maybe this is time for me to do a guided meditation.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I think do we have time for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this is for everybody. Please close your eyes. Breathe through your mouth. Let your body soften more. Your belly gets softer. Soft belly. Jaw relaxes. Forehead relaxes. What I'm going to do is say some incomplete sentences. I want you to respond to them spontaneously. I mean, finish the sentences out loud, but don't repeat my part. And keep your eyes closed throughout this exercise. Here we go. I'm feeling. When I get scared, what I usually do is and when I got scared as a young child, what I usually did was and what's scaring me the most these days is and breathe a little deeper. And where I feel that fear in my body most strongly right now is and now place your hands in that part of your body, maybe your lower belly, solar plexus, heart. Put both hands on your torso, either together or in different parts of the torso. And have a sense that you're starting to make contact with the fear. Just a tiny bit, not rushing it. And here's some more sentences to finish. What I notice about my fear right now is and if my fear had a color or colors, the coloring would be if my fear that I'm feeling right now, to whatever degree, had a shape, that shape would be and if the fear I'm feeling now had some sort of movement, that movement would be breathing a touch deeper. And imagine now the fear you sense in your torso, your belly, is a very young child. Who's scared? Who doesn't have your adult equipment and how to deal with it? They're just scared. And this child happens to be you when you were little. Imagine you can sense this child a little more now, and you start to take your awareness, your loving awareness toward this child, visualizing them when they're scared. Maybe they're on their bed, maybe they're curled up, or they're not breathing very deep. You see the look on their face, and you actually let yourself tune into this child more than you usually do. If I could say anything to this young child inside me right now who's scared, I'd say to him or her, and as I feel myself getting even closer to this child in me, the scared child, I'm starting to feel imagining now that you're starting to feel more love for this child. And if love is hard for you with the child, let it be compassion. You're intending compassion for and to this child. And also have a sense that you're feeling a sense of protectiveness. Here's some more sentences. I will protect this child from. And the more I feel this combination of love and protectiveness toward the child in me, the more I allowing your belly to be even softer now. So you're making a little more room for the child, a little more room for your fear. Not trying to get away from your fear or get rid of it. You're simply becoming a little more intimate with it. And when I imagine all those others on this earth who are afraid as I am or more afraid, I feel. And the more I open myself to their fearfulness, the more I and what I wish in my heart of hearts for all these other people is my own grief is and when I let myself feel my own grief, however slightly, I am. And if that grief could somehow speak, it might say, my capacity for love is. My true nature is. And beyond body, mind, gender, occupation, I am. And as I hold my fearfulness tenderly, I am. I am grateful for. I'm also grateful for. And take a deep, deep breath all the way in. Really deep. Hold it for a few seconds and let it go completely. Let it go fully. Then one more breath, even deeper. Let it go. And open your eyes. And here we are.
Wow, that was great. Thank you, Robert. I think that really embodied a lot of the things that you've talked about on this call, and I found that very powerful. So I hope everyone else did too. So we have around about 24 people online at the moment. I'd like to give people the opportunity to ask any questions in the chat box that we could ask to Dr. Masters. So I'll give you a moment to see, or if you have any questions. Is there anything else that's coming up for you, Robert, that you think you'd like to share with people while we're just waiting for if there's any questions?
I think the meditation is, I mean, I felt it too. You know, I'm doing it. I'm making it up on the spot. That always speaks to me, to start off with something that's very real, it's very human, then to expand, opening my heart to it, but not to try and rise above it. Like you can be sitting here still afraid, but there's a sense of peace inside because we've gotten a little bigger. And we've also felt our grief. We felt, to whatever degree, we felt some communion and connection. Fear can isolate us very easily. Grief connects us. And
Yeah,
people are curious about the conscious round. I want to say that I have one of my blogs and my website is called How to Have a Conscious Rant. So on the website.
great. And could you tell us what your website is?
robertmasters.com.
Okay, great.
And also another thing I want people to know is I retired from individual work 4 or 5 years ago, and I've reopened my practice because of COVID to do individual work again for a while. So if anyone is interested in individual work with me, they can contact me through my website, and we can go ahead with that over the next few months.
Okay, great.
I'll ask you one other thing. My wife Diane, who's a musician, really great singer, she created 2 CDs that are basically support the work I'm doing. So and they're free now. We've taken them off. We're not trying to make money off them at all. You go to my website, click on the music in the menu, and you can download both of her CDs, which have to do everything to do with the way I'm working, what we're talking about. And they're good reminders of the whole process of awakening and healing.
Absolutely, I would definitely agree with that. And I found at certain times during doing this work, having that music to listen to has been very, very soothing.
So do we have any questions?
Yeah, there is a couple here. So first question is from Lorita. Can you please speak to the difference between the inner child and the shadow? How do you discern between the two?
Well, they're not really it's like apples and oranges. I mean, the shadow always includes child. To some extent, the child's in the shadow. Some extent, it's not. I mean, the shadow is not part of the child. The child can be part of the shadow. But working with your child, where the conditioning is most prevalently laden, that's essential to shadow work. So shadow work is not like you do shadow work here and child work there. If you're doing child work deeply, it will bring out stuff that's in your shadow, all the conditioning.
Right. Okay. Thanks for clarifying. Now, one question about the amount of conflicting information that's out there at the moment, and how to deal with. And I think you've talked to this to some degree, but how do we deal with all this different information that's going around and the difference of opinion around this pandemic?
Well, read it with more than your mind, because your mind will attach to all these different perspectives, reject this, go with that. It becomes too intellectual. Go with your gut, and also don't overdo it. Like we've been living in what I would call data smog for decades now. We've gotten used to it. There's too much information, whether it's through social media, news. There's so much, and given the ability of our little computers we carry around with us all the time, which used to be our phones, We can access things so quickly, Google anything. There's a price we pay for that. Our attention span gets cut down and we get lost, and we actually are drowning, many of us, in information. So you want to be discerning, read the news with your heart and guts. And yeah, that's all I can say now.
Okay, great. And could you talk a little bit about how to teach children to sit with fear? Because that's, for many families, that's a big thing.
Set an example. And that's part of it. Set an example. And then part two is when they're afraid, don't tell them it's going to be okay. Don't talk them out of it. If they've had a bad nightmare, you want to just hold them, be with them. Maybe find out what was in the nightmare rather than giving them the message. Let's get away from that just because you are. So your way of dealing with fear will have a profound impact on how your children deal with their own.
Right. Okay. And another question regarding you started touching on dream work a little bit. So let's say, that one of the listeners is having quite a few vivid or strong dreams. What are some ways in which we could start to work with those?
Well, first of all, you want to write them down so you don't forget them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I'd written that down. But once it's there and you're by yourself, you don't have a therapist to help you or whatever, you just simply start saying the dream and notice what it brings up in you from your history, what's going on in the previous couple of days of your life, just to get more of a sense of the details, and then start to play it out a little bit. If there's someone in the dream that's after you or wants to hurt you, imagine you're them, have them speak to you, then you speak back. You play the parts out, because everything in the dream often is a part of us. So, for example, someone has a nightmare and there's an enormous bear chasing them, scaring them, and I have them play it out. They get to be the bear, which is a little embarrassing for some people who don't want to express themselves fully, but they get to be the bear, and eventually they'll realize in most cases the bear is part of them they're avoiding, like their power. Many people don't have much power, things chasing them, pursuing them. And after a while, there's a sense, it's not a bear now, it's me. It's my disowned power. It goes on and on. Like dreams are endlessly full of meaning and levels. And once you start to work with them a little bit, you take it deeper and deeper. And if you form a dream group, it's even better. If you have a few friends that want to share their dreams, or if you're in therapy, tell your therapist your dreams. And hopefully your therapist will have some skill on how to work with them.
Right. Yeah, no, they're great tips. Thanks. And I think one of the take-home messages I'm getting from this whole interview is around connection. The importance of connecting with oneself at a deep level. And the new piece that you've introduced today to me is how that actually connects people and how it can help us to be more vulnerable and connected to other individuals.
And when we're home, we're alone during this time, and we start to feel cut off or isolated, that's a perfect time to start connecting with the elements in yourself you're not that familiar with. Get to know certain emotions more, get to know different patterns of behavior you have. Then that's a connection. It's intra-connection. It's just you and you. But you might, if you have no one else to be around, do that. Take advantage of Skype and Zoom, check in with other people, not just for chit-chat, do something maybe a little deeper, a little more challenging. And treat this as a time to work on yourself, because before you know it, things will have shifted.
Absolutely. And I think there is the possibility that this whole pandemic situation could lead to a more connected world, and perhaps a world where we're more simple in some ways, and perhaps spending more time with family and
exactly. And even if it's a small scale, it's worth saying, okay, I'm going to take advantage. Here's my meditation retreat. I'm going to be mindful more than I am usually of different things. I'm going to practice. And yes, I'll probably lose a lot of it once we're back to something approaching normal, so-called normal, but it's worth doing.
Great. Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Robert, for all your work, firstly, but also for being generous with your time today and sharing a little bit about how people can work with some of these emotions that are coming up during this pandemic. Again, I'd like to share your website, robertmasters.com, and encourage people to reach out and have a look at your CD program, Knowing the Shadow, and also some of your books, which are widely available. And thank you again. It's been a great. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you all who listened. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, bye for now.
Be in touch.
Okay.